how did it start?
Hi, my name is Camila, and my film was Muse. I was born in a family of artists, so ever since I was a kid, I could see like the struggles that my dad, being an artist, would have with my mom, who was his muse. And this obviously caused a relationship where they fed off each other, and it was beautiful at times because of the art they could make together, but at times it was also very detrimental to the relationship. So I was very inspired to explore more about what it means to make art and be an artist.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, I'm Enrique Mendoza. My film is La Leyenda del Sombrerón. I think the inspiration behind the film is like trying to deviate from like the stories that come from Central America that usually turns to be like gangs, drugs, violence, and I live in a world where like I like the blend of like fairy tale fantasy world where like something is a little surreal. I don't like telling the beginning of a story or the ending of the story, but just what's gonna happen, like what we're like in the middle of where the characters are. And I like folk tales. Like I think it's like a big part of our culture that we don't explore as much. And I think like we find like a lot of interesting stories there. And I always like to tell story with a little girl. So this was my excuse to do it.
Congrats. Hi, I'm John Estrada, one half of the Estrada brothers. We did the Wereback, the crazy werewolf monster. Our beautiful star right there, Sana Chavadilla is right there. It was wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm jealous of all the crew you guys had on all your phones. It was just me and my brother and like 2 people. But anyways, the inspiration is, I mean, look, my brother and I, we grew up, we love horror, we love monster movies. We just wanted to take a familiar genre and have some fun and put it in the world of characters and faces that you don't normally see in Hollywood horror movies. And that was it, and just try to create our own myths and our own characters. We love folklore too. So that was basically it. But anyways, it was a lot of fun doing it. And again, thanks Ethan for having us back here. It was really cool.
Hi, my name is Blake Vaz. I'm the director of Luna. Our producers are up here, and Roman is one of our writers actually. And you know, in terms of the story, he could tell you more where it came from. But I think the appeal for me when we met at a festival, we both had a movie ad, and the appeal for me was that obviously, like you mentioned, I'm a huge horror fan myself, and that's kind of like why I want to, you know, play and stay in that genre. And they came to me with this cool script that it was kind of like the classic horror, you know, haunted house thing, but with this modern twist in terms of the technology. So I thought, you know, it was a really cool idea that we could kind of go in different directions, and then visually and stylistically, I brought the visuals of the Italian genre giallo, which I'm working on a feature that's going to have that specific visual style, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's basically an Italian slasher. Slashers come from giallos, we're more stylistic, so we kind of wanted to combine all those elements from classic horror films and bring it into kind of like a modern, you know, modern twist. So that's kind of what we ended up with.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh yeah, you saw that. You got it.
It's interesting you bring up the giallo influence into it, because I think all of your films, and when it comes to genre films, there's a lot of world building that comes into them, right? You want your characters to feel like they're really living in this space, and I think you all did a great job on that. But when you were creating these worlds, did you create yourself a set of rules of things that you wanted to make sure you included, but also things that maybe you're like, I'm not trying to stay away from that? And if so, what was that process like?
I get the mic, I'll just go. I mean, really, we didn't really overthink it too much. I mean, we just had an idea that we wanted to create a world where there are monsters and characters in this kind of crazy universe, and just set our own rules. And so, you know, the idea of a familiar character as an immigrant, someone trying to cross over possibly into the U.S., added with the spice of what's the horror version of that, what's the monster version of that. Obviously there was some political subtext with the with the manga guy and, just kind of being on point. But as when we screened it for Horrible Imaginings and Miguel saw it, and Miguel was all mad, he was like, man, I wanted to see the wereback rise up and thrash that manga guy. I said, well, we were just getting started. But, I mean, really, it was always just a matter of just making something. I mean, all of us, you have this idea, you have this vision. It's a matter of just, putting the work in and doing it, right? I mean, that's the inspiration. So that was kind of it. I mean, it wasn't really more than, what are the rules of the wereback, or, is it a full moon? It was just staying true to some of the classic tropes that we like in horror and monsters. And that was it. Pass it down here.
That sounds like a sequel.
The rise of the, yeah.
I think for me it's there is a lot of world building. It's it's kind of because it's a fairy tale and it starts with a little lullaby. That's kind of it gets bookended by that little me trying to write a poem. But in the middle, there's a lot of little nudges of elements that could be built into something bigger, like the priest talking about this is one of the first seals that got broken, and the guy riding the horse is called dead, and it kind of opens the door to all the other folktales in Guatemala, when La Llorona, there's a little more in the regions, a little more expanded, and kind of seeing oh, this is just one of many horrors that could happen in this world. So I did a little bit of that world building, but obviously it's a short, so you cannot really expand too much, because otherwise you will lose focus on what you're actually telling. But yeah, there's a little bit of that in the film.
Well, actually, on mine, I wanted the space where the artist was working with his muse to be the space inside his head, in a way. And my artist is, he's someone who's on his last show, and basically he's someone who's not willing to let go of what his glory was. And so this space he's in, which is filled with all these old things that are beautiful and artistic, but they're just laying everywhere and they're not current anymore. I also wanted that to reflect his current state of mind and of being. It was a bit crazy because I was very inspired by a couple of tales, and also Dorian Gray's, the picture of Dorian Gray, and I really like that genre. But I shot that in Mexico, so there are no Victorian things in Mexico. They're so trying to make that with the help of family furniture and friends and all that was crazy. The art direction team was incredible. They took forever to build that, and we had a very short time to shoot, and that really did consume a lot of the shooting time. But in the end, for me, it was always very important that the space would look like that, because I wanted that space to be kind of a gold prison, kind of what emulates in the when you see the little bird who's in in a golden cage. So yeah, the world building definitely had a lot to do with the movie.
For us, I think it was always kind of deliberate, and again, I go back to Roman, who along with Mike wrote the script for Luna. And it was always an idea of expanding this world into a feature, which we actually have. Roman and Mike have written, and we're kind of in the process of figuring out how to get this done. Obviously, it would follow kind of the same vibe, the same idea, but it's an expanded world, right? If you can imagine, the short itself, it could serve almost as the opening scene of a feature. So when you see that final shot, it can go anywhere really, right? So obviously without saying too much, there's definitely an expanded world there that we're excited to kind of share, and obviously we're in the process of trying to figure out how to get that funding. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. But in terms of everything else, I think, again, stylistically, it wasn't a plan that I had to make it look like a giallo. I wanted to be deliberate into being kind of, not pushing it too much. It had to be subtle. And, obviously you got the Inferno shirt, and if I don't say it's a giallo, it's not necessarily a giallo, but it's obviously something that we want to, from the look, from certain choices in terms of shots to the music, which was composed by Julio up there, it's my writing partner. and bass player in my band. So we wrote the music, and that was all deliberate in terms of how we wanted to build this world.
Awesome, thank you. Does anybody in the crowd have any questions?
So I noticed for Wereback that the film was mostly silent. There was nobody talking throughout that film. Was that a challenge for you, or how did that work?
It was one of those things where when we decided to do it, it was that we were actually creating a teaser, and this was one part of a teaser where there were going to be these other characters, these other monster characters in totally different worlds, and it just so happened that the wonderful Sandra was available. A friend of mine had a studio. We put the truck together. It was just like, hey, we can make this happen very quickly. And I wrote a storyline that was basically kind of a setup, much like as he was explaining with Luna. Just kind of setting up the world of people in a truck, people going about their thing. Suddenly the full moon happens, and just trying to cutting to the chase a little bit. So it just kind of happened accidentally that suddenly there was no dialogue. And tried to play a little bit with the sound mix and have some fun. That's not the final sound mix you're hearing, unfortunately, but it's just kind of a temp stereo. Nonetheless, I guess it was kind of like, hey, let's just put everybody in a truck. Let's just make the production design. It's really my brother. He was a cinematographer. He created the kind of the production look and feel of it. So it was just kind of like an accident, really. It wasn't really intentional to not have anybody do dialogue. I'm sure Sandra was ready to do some dialogue, but she was also ready to tear it up, so good for her. Anyway, I hope that answers your question.
It did. Thank you.
Thanks for coming out.
Any other questions? I think, well, you have the microphone, so I'll ask you one. What was the process like with that when she started deteriorating? Because how was that? Those special effects look great, and it's rare that you see like that kind of quality in like a short. So how was that process like for all of you?
It was very long. So basically, the thing is that obviously when this was a short film that was made with a lot of favors and friends, which is amazing, and I'm very grateful to everyone, because otherwise this would have not happened, So, but because of that, also I was working in a timeline where it was like when my friends could do it. So the process was kind of lengthy also because initially the way she was deteriorating was more like a kind of like a pixel style, and it looked good, kind of like in the Avengers when they vanish, and it looked good, but I thought it was very digital looking and very like out of the world we were in, and then I came across these old statues, the Venus of Milo, and where these statues are like missing parts of them, and they kind of deteriorate in blocks. And I really like that idea of having the muse being such these gorgeous, beautiful thing that's almost like a sculpture, and that's like transcendental, and that just doesn't of having her deteriorate like a sculpture would, which is in pieces and not like just like pixels. So hope that answers the question, but.
The VFX were really good.
They were.
It's interesting because at the beginning when it started to like crackle, just a comment, but like when it started to crackle, I just feel like it's like the paint, when like light hits the paint, it's like cracking.
Yeah.
And so you almost feel like the painting that he's doing is like reflected on her. That's how I felt it.
No, okay, the first part, definitely the idea was that because he's obsessed with finishing this painting, and basically he has to kind of choose eventually if he will stay with the muse or he will finish the painting so she vanishes. And I like that idea because as artists, I'm sure we've all been there, but sometimes there is a project that you just keep turning and spinning around, and part of it is, you might have writer's block and all, but I also feel part of it is because you just don't really want to let go of that because of the void you feel after that. So definitely when he's painting, like she starts like kind of becoming like the paint and deteriorating.
Anybody have any questions? I'll keep going. For Leyenda del Soberón,
Oh, oh.
were you in any way nervous at the beginning? Because I feel like whenever there's like a story about a folk tale, like so many people are connected to it, it's hard to appease, right? So what was that decision making like?
This is interesting because the whole region to region, right? Because it starts like you can hear from Soberon from Mexico all the way down to Colombia, and it kind of changes a little bit according to the context. I remember like seeing like I don't know, a YouTube video from Medellin where they tell like the legend of Soberon, and it's completely different to the way I grew up. And like I read the book. It's a book from Miguel Ángel Asturias, a Guatemalan writer, and he kind of tells the legend differently. So what I did is like I picked pieces from regions and I kind of created my own mythology around it. So it feels a little more like unique. It kind of like helps like helps serve the story like the way it is, and it kind of like pays tribute to like what Soberon is across the entire region and not just one single country, right? So like, it feels a little more universal. I was definitely nervous because like it's really tricky to play with mythology, like especially when you're like something that is not established as, let's say, La Llorona. Like everybody knows La Llorona, like there's movies about it. Like, but Soberon is a character that's equally interesting but not too talked about. And a lot of the mythology around it is like this little guy with a big hat, and I wanted to like portray him to be more like a gentleman looking, like he's like tall guy with a beard, like you feel like, because like all these folk tales to me have always been like cautionary tales, and like that's kind of like what this was, like it's something like you're not gonna be that afraid about like this big hat that is just like walking around. So like, so I wanted to make it seem like a little more like something that could be inspired, like a little bit of fear and like a little girl.
Awesome.
But yeah, so answer your question, yes, nervous all the time, from the beginning to the end of the film.
Then for the wearback, why don't you talk to us a little bit about those practical effects? That another thing that we don't see as much, not even in big budget films nowadays.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the intention was always, we had a good makeup artist, Brian Barnett, met through a mutual friend, and we knew, my brother and I knew, that we wanted to do practical effects. We wanted to make it gory and bloody. I mean, again, we grew up in the 70s and the 80s, the heyday of when, those films were done, and all the practical effects, the Rick Bakers, the Rob Bottin's, the Steve Johnsons, the Stan Winstons. I mean, we loved, I grew up reading Fangoria. I was like, I love seeing those pages and stuff. So we knew right then and there that we wanted to do something. So it's like the first thing you got to do is like, dude, you got to have the bladders. You got to have the American Werewolf, the Howling kind of homage. And Brian was fantastic. He's super talented. And then at the very end, it became a little bit easier to just not do a full makeup because Sandra was under that thing for a few hours getting ready in the bladders and transforming, but she was raging and she was wonderful. But then it was we just bought a mask, so it kind of, if you notice, the look kind of transforms into a mask. And again, it was just kind of one of those down and dirty, like, here's a mask, let's just do this, it's working. I'm actually the guy wearing the mask, thrashing everybody, sweating my ass off, excuse my language, in that thing. But yeah, it was always an intention to say, we want to have bladders, we want to have, we want to have practical effects. And Brian's idea to do the fingernails, he had a really cool idea. We shot it in reverse and all that. Again, classic, cinematic tricks that have been used time and time again. So again, it was a lot of fun, but it was always the intention to just, do our version and our homage that celebrates practical effects. So.
Awesome.
Good job.
Thank you. And I watched all of your shorts in the room by myself with my laptop. So watching it here has been a great experience,
Yeah.
and seeing all your work. But for Luna, I love those opening shots. And I was wanted to ask, were you able to manage to get a crane? How are those shots? How are those shots? Achieved?
We got a J-bar.
Nice.
Like you were mentioning, a lot of this was with a lot of favors. Obviously, it's easier living in LA and working in the industry. There's a lot of people that, from, Steadicam operators to gaffers to cinematographers that are friends with, and that, usually we kind of, as a community, help each other, kind of like bring up each other's, projects to life. So usually his day would have been my whole budget, but he's like, I'll do it, and so yeah, it's like we got to play with the big boy toys, and that's really dope. And one of the first things when Xavier and Roman kind of like told me, we went to the house. I think they already had the house. They were thinking this is the location that we want to shoot at. I think the first thing I saw, I walked in, it was the three of us and our DP, and the first thing I said is like, I want to do this exterior shot through the windows and meet them, Obviously, at the time, we figuring out maybe we'll do it with a gimbal, and we're gonna have to do it, kind of like, figuring it out. But thankfully, we were able to get the tube. And it was the last shot. They were kicking us out as we were doing that shot, and that was the only shot that I cared about. Just kidding. But it was done. It worked out. Thank you.
Awesome. So anybody have any questions? Right there.
This question goes to all of you. Thank you so much for sharing all of your films. It's great seeing in a big screen. Did you realize from the beginning you knew the ending? But I feel like as you're producing the film, you kind of tend to shift things, or maybe it's something that in the film you didn't show that you could have, but then you had to cut off, or did you pivot and actually ended up the way you didn't want to, or was it always the ending of, I mean, it could be several questions, so I'll start with you, ma'am.
Yeah, well, actually, I always start with an image. I don't know why, but in my case, I always have an image about the end of a movie, and then it's kind of it's kind of difficult because then I have to figure out like how I got there, and I have so many screenwriter friends who are like very disciplined, and they go with the structure and all, and I do everything backwards, so it's kind of messy sometimes. But I actually started with this idea of having this painter with a muse that was fading in front of him. So that was actually the ending I thought about, not the other part. That was added later. I wanted to give it a comic spin, but I feel like in my case, this was my first short. So basically, the thing that happened and that I don't wish I knew sooner, because that's what you do also shorts for. You kind of learn along the way, right? But definitely some things did not go as planned. There were some scenes that we couldn't shoot because of time. And I feel that if I had been more connected to the present, which I understood now that is a very important lesson, I would have found a way to work with what I had better instead of being stressed. So I do feel that, and as far as I know, like even if you're Martin Scorsese, things will not be exactly as you want them to be, and you won't get like all the funding you need or all the time you need. So I feel that definitely you have to be willing to have a plan and an idea of what you want to do, but then be flexible to whatever's coming your way, because things will come your way. So yeah, that's kind of how it went in my case.
Yeah, I think in terms of filmmaking and in art in general, I think you need to be able to be ready to kind of pivot, right? And in production, that's the main thing that out. And so yeah, it's a good point. I'm pretty sure that 99.99% of movies do not end up like it was originally planned. And obviously, some things once you're on set, you realize that they don't really work. That you can't really see until you're there in terms of blocking, in terms of kind of like the pacing of the actors, or just something that you want to do in terms of lighting. But and for us, we're filmmakers who are beginning, starting with shorts and kind of learning up from these things. A big thing is kind of like time management, and it's always, I'm pretty sure that happens to you guys. You have to drop shots and figure it out. You get to a point where you're like, crap, we only have 4 hours left, and I still have all these pages to do in terms of all these things that I have to shoot. It's just you have to pivot and figure it out and get creative. For us, it was a couple of shots. They were kind of specialty shots that would have added to kind of like the whole fill, the Jalo thing. I wanted to do a POV. but there just wasn't enough time. It doesn't mean that it wasn't as good. It's just how do we kind of like keep that idea or that vibe going without doing the original thing? And it's just about kind of like figuring it out. And I think it's part of the art. You know, you have to be able to pivot and move and make sure that just because you didn't end up with your plan, it doesn't mean that it's not, you know, a product that you're proud of. And I think all of us are super proud, and if that's a big thing, like I said again, you have to be able to pivot.
I have to say, I started a script with a big budget. Because in my head it was like, I'm gonna get this beautiful moonshot, and I'm gonna fly it down, we're gonna see the little girl in the middle of a big forest with a trail to her. And then I realized that I'm shooting with a little girl at night for 3 days. Obsessed with Stranger Things, so she shaved her head. And I was like, oh, okay, so now we have to fix that. And then we shut it down in Guatemala, and this turned out to be a coffee plantation. So there's not really tall trees, there's small ones, because it's coffee. So there's a lot of things that are like, yeah, a lot of improvising in this short. We wanted to shoot it in a church, but then when we said like the priest is talking about this and this, like this demonic thing, then the priest was like, yeah, you're not getting the church. So we had to like makeshift one in the middle of like in the middle of this little village.
And it's
But
very cool.
yeah, I mean, I'm happy that we had like an amazing crew. Like everybody that was involved in the film put like 110% of their soul in it. And our production designer, the day we had the location locked 2 days before we start shooting, and the day before we start shooting the church fell like through, and we're like, oh, what are we gonna do? And she was like, let me build a church. And I was like, wait, sure, do it. I'll figure out the shots the day of. Like, you have a day to build it, and I'll figure out how I'm gonna block it and everything like in the next 6 hours. And that's gonna be during the day, and then at night we shoot, and then that's how we did it. And it's interesting. We shot at night in the middle of a forest with 2 really loud ass generators. So we tried to like park them far so you don't really hear them in the audio, but then we need to grab one of them and put it on the makeup department because we need to fix the hair of the little girl every like 20 minutes because, you know, like extensions and stuff. But it was yeah, it's rewarding. Like I see the film and like that's the film that I love. Yeah.
Congrats. Where I said we started with kind of, it was supposed to be a teaser with these other things. We shot it. The original victims that were thrashed, it was really bloody and gory. And we realized after we shot it that, I mean, you know, there were a couple little girls there, and we're like, okay, this is maybe a little too extreme, not necessarily the kind of tone we're going for. So I had the idea that, okay, well, actually Sandra had the idea of saying, hey, why not bring the girl back? You know, now she's transformed back. Let's see her story. So it was a great story idea, so we wrote up a little sequence. My brother, who's a location manager by trade, found us this great shot out by like Fontana or Hesperia, way out, you know, those rocks and stuff where you saw. So we went out there, we grabbed Sandra and said, look, you're just basically, you know, we just kind of rewrote it. And then I was the guy because, you know, you got to do it, right? You know, you just grew the mustache out and, you know, made myself as horrible looking as I possibly could. And it was just like, hey, let's just go shoot it and let's have some fun. Let's be a little, you know, get a little political subtext there and kind of set it up that, you know, that's the world that this woman, this character exists in, but you can't kill her, you can't bring her down, she will rise, she will die. And that's what it became. So it was really kind of like, again, a classic pivot of just like, what we shot doesn't work, the original idea we had didn't work, you know, you collaborate, you get creative, someone comes up with a great idea, you just go and you run with it. We made it happen, and I think it's the better version than what we originally had. So again, thanks, Sandra. That was a great idea.
Anytime.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. And I think we'll end it with super original question. What's next? What's next for all of you?
I'll just go first. Well, I go to work tomorrow, so I work at Universal Pictures. I'm actually a studio executive by day, wannabe filmmaker by night. So I go back to that. Actually, I just finished writing a script, a feature that I want to direct. So it's like really, I've been in the business for almost 30 years on the studio side, done a lot of independent stuff. So this is kind of really my chance to maybe have some fun and take a swing at directing. something that maybe we can shoot in El Salvador or Guatemala, possibly.
Do it. Do it.
Maybe I'll talk to you. Anyway, so that's what's next, but, excited and, this is a great honor to be here and be back. So that's what's next, really.
I'm just gonna go. Well, I don't really have any immediate plans except for like going back to work. I have this script that I always wanted to do, but it's animation. So if anybody knows how to produce animation, I'm all game. And keep writing. That's pretty much it.
Okay, well, I'm currently writing my next short, and it's also kind of magical real world. And I'm also writing a pilot, and I finished a feature. So it's been a lot of writing since the pandemic happened somehow. So it's been a good ride in that sense.
Yeah, like I was mentioning, for me is we're trying to figure out how to get Luna the feature done. It's a long process, but you're an independent filmmaker, so that's like the next big thing that we're hoping to do. But we also have a couple of shorts, that the guys also are working on that we might collaborate in. And I'm finishing up the script for my Giallo. It'll be a feature length, kind of like modern. And in terms of how I describe it, it's kind of like Neon Demon meets Deep Red from Argento. Finishing up that script, and we'll see what happens. But the main thing, obviously, that we're focused on is on making sure that Luna gets out there and figuring out how to get the feature done. And yeah, thanks for having us, and thank you everyone for being here.
I have a question. What is Luna?
What's the name of the device? It's a long. What does it stand for? Luna.
It's made by a corporation. It's Nazareth Universal Networking Appliance.
So in that world, if you saw the girl had the LTO, she's like a technician who works for that company. So it's kind of like tech meets kind of like some weird dark kind of world in terms of kind of like supernatural. So yeah.
Love it.
Again, big round of applause for them.
Thank you. Yes, Bob. There you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Congratulations.